Welcome. Welcome to Beaumont Church. If this is your first time or if you've been coming here for several years, we are very glad to have you all here. You are all welcome and affirmed and loved and valued exactly as you are, regardless of your socioeconomic status, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, or any of those things that can divide us. You are welcome, loved, and affirmed in this space. And we're really glad to have you. For those of you that are here for the first time, obviously we are a go-with-the-flow kind of church, and it is not a perfection kind of place, which she will talk about some in her self-care seminar. So we are going to do it a little bit differently today. For those of you that are online, we won't have the worship portion at the beginning. We'll actually be doing some activities and breakout groups. So for those of you all online, we'll kind of have like an online group, and then for those here in person, we'll kind of break out into different groups in that way too. Yeah. Any announcements or anything?
We'll do it at the end.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for the welcome. How is everybody?
Good.
Okay. Did anything kind of come up for self-care this last week? Anything that kind of pinged, or you're like, oh, that wisdom that Niamh rained down on me last Sunday is just rolling around in my brain. Did anything? Anybody do any self-care?
I fed the cats with Danny.
You fed the cats with Danny. That counts as self-care. Yeah. Did anyone else self-care at all? Okay. Process of self-care? Cool.
So I thought about self-care not always being fun. I need to go for medicine. I don't like drinks, so it's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you take care of yourself, though.
Yeah.
That is the best form of self-care. Did you do any self-care, Zoe? Put you on the spot.
I think I did like self-care by continuing to set and hold boundaries.
Self-care by continuing to set and hold boundaries.
Yeah.
That-
Sometimes it's not fun to say no, but
Sometimes it's not fun to say no, but sometimes it is important to say no. It's like you know we're going to talk about boundaries today or something. Weird.
Stop, because that's what my therapist and I talked about on Thursday.
You guys talk about boundaries?
Yeah, and I realized that I actually have shit boundaries. That's
I do too. Weird. Okay. So just to like kind of, for those of us who weren't here last week, this is part 2 of a self-care seminar that we're doing as a church. We're learning about what self-care is and what self-care isn't. Kind of determining what is like the best way to take care of ourselves in the long run, instead of doing what's the word I'm looking for, like instant gratification things that make us feel better in the moment but aren't really long-lasting self-care, kind of trying to navigate that. And so today, we're going to kind of take it a little step further. We're going to do some activities to kind of help us see where we're at in our self-care journey. And just as like a preface, because when I did this with my foster parents, they went through some of the stuff and they were like, I suck. And I was like, no, no, this is not about like, this is not supposed to be a thing that makes you look down and feel sad about like what blind spots you have in self-care, or to, have like shame or anything like that. That's not what this is about. It's just kind of trying to determine where our strengths are and where like we have some room to grow. And of course, we're gonna have room to grow probably in all of the areas, and that's just who we are as people. So as this goes on, don't beat yourself up, please, because that's not the point of these activities, just to bring awareness. Yeah. So, talk about setting boundaries. And boundaries are fun. They can be fun. They can be. But yes. Why do we hate boundaries sometimes? Like, why are they hard? Anybody have an answer for that?
Because they inconvenience people.
Because boundaries inconvenience people. They can. Absolutely.
Boundaries are tempting to cross.
Boundaries are tempting to cross.
Sometimes people feel like, well, why don't you love me enough to do this thing?
Some people feel like, why don't you love me enough to do this thing? Sometimes it feels like you're being mean when you set a boundary. Those are all really good answers, guys. Thank you for that. Boundaries are hard. And I would venture to say that if boundaries aren't modeled to you from your parents, it makes it that much harder to even know what boundaries are and how to ask for things that you need, instead of worrying about upsetting everybody around you, because no one wants to have boundaries. At least that was the case in my family growing up. I had no idea what the word boundary, like what boundaries were, or what that meant until I was in college, because I read her name wrong. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know like what that meant in relationships. That has been a journey for me in setting boundaries. But pros of setting boundaries would be better communication, even when that's hard, a greater protection of your rights, improved self-awareness, lesser resentment and anger. How many people have ever felt resentful? Why do we usually feel resentful of others?
I think a lot of times we're just sorry. I think you should have known better.
You should have known better, okay?
I think a lot of times it happens when we're trying to take on more than we can handle.
When we try to take on more than we can handle. That is from not saying no, right? So we're going to circle back to resentment, and I are best friends because I struggle really hard with boundaries. But when we have boundaries, we feel less resentful and less angry toward others. Better stress management because we're less, resentful and angry, and we're saying no, and we're taking care of ourselves. A greater ability to constructively solve conflicts when we have boundaries set in place and are clear about them. Improved assertiveness. I'm not assertive. I was not raised to be assertive. So this is another reason why I struggle with boundaries. More self-compassion and compassion for others in general. Better self-care, an increased feeling of safety, improved relationships, a feeling that you are valued and accepted, because there is nothing better than when someone hears your boundary and accepts it and respects it. So great. It is so good. And then I have this quote from Brene, because I think it just is awesome, because it just really encompasses why boundaries are so important. And she says, compassionate people ask for what they need. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it. They are compassionate because their boundaries keep them out of resentment. So, some of the most compassionate people are the people that have boundaries, because when they say yes, they truly mean it, and they aren't going to resent you for it later. So, to start out, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, because we kind of talked a little bit about self-trust before last week, but I kind of wanted to talk about it a little more this week, and this in and of itself could be its own thing that we could talk about for a whole hour. This is really just kind of something I want us to think about going forward. I don't want to spend too much time on it today, but if we have questions and we do want to talk about it more, that's fine. It's totally fine. So Brene has this acronym, and it's called the Braving acronym, and this is the anatomy of trust. And so the way that she talks about this is, whenever we talk about like in our relationships and we're like, oh, I don't trust you. Like how many people have heard the I don't trust you and it's just crushing because trust is such a big word. And it just kind of shuts down, I feel like, any kind of healthy communication around trust when we use that word to talk about trust. But if we can break it down into what kind of makes up trust, it makes it a little easier to be like, you didn't respect a boundary when I was really clear about this boundary, or any of these things. So she breaks it down into boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. And I'm going to just pass this around real quick, and then we can talk about it. Because as we build trust with others, she also has an exercise for us to look at this acronym and apply it to ourselves, and kind of gauge where we are in our own ability to trust ourselves, which is, I think, a very cool concept. So whenever you're all ready, just let me know. I want you guys to have a couple minutes to read over it. And then we're going to do a little activity. This one I want us to do more on our own. This won't be a group activity. And again, I don't want us to spend too much time on this today, but I think it's really important to kind of have this in the back of our minds to build self-trust in order to know ourselves better and our relationships, and that inherently will trickle, I don't want to say trickle down, like trickle down economics, but it will come kind of full circle later on when we start to talk about our values.
Are we supposed to think of a specific situation or in general?
Just in general. Yeah, if a specific situation would help you, but it's just in general. Do you consistently do a good job of respecting your own boundaries? You set boundaries and then you hold people accountable to respect their own boundaries. Does that make sense? You follow in your, I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock every night because I need that. And then you consistently cross your own boundary by, no, I might as well, just 9 isn't that late, or 10 isn't that late, stuff like that, Are you reliable? Do you feel like? Can you hold yourself accountable and not beat yourself up for when you do make mistakes or anything like that? And do you share information you aren't supposed to, or do you hold things in confidence for people? And do you act from a place of integrity? Are you able to ask for what you need? And are you not judgmental toward yourself for asking for help? And then are you generous with yourself? Do you make generous assumptions about yourself? Or are you your own worst enemy and beat yourself up for the smallest things? That kind of thing. That helps break that down for the activity anyway. But if you guys have things that stand out or stick out to you and you want to talk about first in the acronym itself, then let me know. If not, we can just spend 5 minutes on the activity-ish, unless you want more time. Just let me know. Nothing in here needs to be super, we're going to be done by this time, we're going to be done by this time. I just want you guys to get something out of it in whatever way we need to. So, cool. Okay. If you're still working on it, just please feel free to do so. But did anything kind of come up for anybody that they would want to share? It's okay if not. I have plenty that I can share.
For me,
Do you want the mic?
I
For me, with the reliability, I thought of how much easier it is to be reliable for another person than for myself. So sometimes I'll be laying on the couch and I'm like, hey mom, I need to get up and go do this thing. Can you tell me to do it? Because that's gonna make it a lot easier. And I don't know if that's healthy or not, but it's definitely easier for me to go do something.
Yeah. No,
I think that makes sense. And this is kind of goes into sometimes with like boundaries and saying no to people. Like it's so much easier to say no to me and my time than it is to say no to other people, and inherently makes me unreliable to myself and my ability to keep my house clean.
I get that.
Anything else come up for anybody that they would want to share? It's okay if not. Yes.
Actually, I have a question.
Oh yeah, questions.
Well, I can speak. I don't know the way you want to do it. No, it's fine. Anyway, that people are comfortable with.
Looking at the accountability part of it, asking about like holding myself accountable and blaming others. I wonder if it's possible to hold yourself too accountable for only like within instances of others' reaction to like you setting boundaries. Like, is it, yeah, I guess just like, is it possible, do you think it's possible to hold yourself too accountable for others' reactions?
Yes.
And would that fall into the accountability?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a really great, important distinction to make.
Would it not then become like beating yourself up?
Yeah, which kind of goes down to the, am I being generous with myself? Like, see how they're all kind of a little interconnected?
Because I had like a similar, not so much question, but like I was thinking of a similar, in a similar way. I don't know why I was surprised that generosity, like the question that was written was I generous towards myself? I don't know why I was so caught off guard that it's like, oh, are you generous to you? I was fully expecting him to say, are you generous towards other people? And to that, I can confidently say, yes, I am. To myself, fuck no. And I was so caught off guard by it. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about like what Brene Brown, the one that kind of created the Anatomy of Trust, that's one of my favorite things about this is like, you know, it's easy to analyze like your relationships, like do you follow, like having trusting relationships, whether that's with a spouse or a friend or coworker or your boss, or, and then like relating it back to yourself is just like kind of a mind twist. You're like, oh, like, you know, I feel like I am, or I had been really, I would say that I had really good, positive, trusting relationships, and then when you break it down, like for a long time, I've been a like recovering people pleaser, I'd say. So like, you know, had like full-on pneumonia, and my friend was like, oh, like I need to draw on the sidewalk with chalk around campus to advertise for this thing, and I'm like, yeah, I'll be there, and it's 30 degrees outside, you know, and he's like, no, you are not. You're not doing this today, because, you know, she was kind of like implementing that boundary that I needed for myself, and I should have just said no, but I was physically unable to say no to anyone forever. But it is a form of self-care to say no and to hold that line, to take care of yourself, because if you just run yourself into the ground, you can't.
And if that upsets other people, it's not a you thing, it's a that thing.
And if it upsets other people around you when you set those boundaries to take care of yourself, that is not a you thing, that is a them thing. So, is this helpful? Yeah? Did anything else come up for anybody that they would want to share?
I also just wanted to say that something that I realized that as I I was filling this out that I realized that helps me often is when I was thinking about like the non-judgmental part of it, just like, and I do this to other people, but not to myself, like the practice of ascribing validity to like the needs of whatever is being asked for. Because like with myself, I have a tendency to go like, well, do I really like need this, or is this me just being like selfish or like indulgent to myself? And I've started trying to kind of like find or like just recognize because the reasoning is there, but just recognize the reasoning and remind myself of like, well, no, you need to like, you know, say no to this now so that you can say yes to other things later, so that you have like the capacity to do these things, because otherwise you won't have the capacity to do the things that are that you're prioritizing.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything?
But once you lose trust in someone,
Once you lose trust in someone,
it's really hard to get it back.
it's really hard to get it back. It is. And I think this is why this is so important to kind of break it down, because it's like, it makes it easier to digest and to be like, this is where we have an issue in the relationship. Because I had very clearly communicated this boundary, and for whatever reason, we keep running into it. It's a problem. Like, you have a vocabulary around it, so that if I just don't trust you, you're not a trustworthy individual. Well, then people are like, why? Though, like, why? And then now you have a place to start. And if people then take ownership of that and start to make changes, you can find restitution in that, especially within yourself. Yes. Oh,
Continue your thought.
yeah. I mean, that was really the end of my thought. Yeah. Yeah.
Something.
Do you want my?
Something that I think this exercise, I just realized, well, this and also my therapy session on Thursday, made me realize that I hold so many, I have so many standards to myself that I only apply to myself and not to anybody else. It's like I have this expectation that like I have to be a certain way, that I have to do X, Y, and Z, or just like be one type of person. And then when I am unable to be that for whatever reason, it doesn't quite make me spiral, but it gets me really close to it. And it doesn't matter how many times my friends are like, no, like, you're fine, like, there's no need to have these standards, or explicitly said that if I were to actually name the thing, like, I don't need to not have any needs, like, I'm allowed to need and want, but for whatever reason, like, it doesn't, I can't comprehend that, and I can't get past it. Like, I can't allow myself to need, almost. Which I didn't expect for this, like, self-trust. What does that, like, on a surface level, doesn't have much to do with self-trust.
It does.
It does. And I am frustrated that it does. Because I'd really like it to not.
Yeah. It would be a lot easier if it didn't.
Yeah, it would be a lot easier.
This is good. This is good. This is really good. So for me, just to kind of, put myself on the spotlight real quick before we move on, I'm not a very good communicator. And it's because growing up for me, communication meant I upset other people, and that is my fault for upsetting other people. And communication doesn't actually fix things, it makes it worse. So that is something I've had to really undo, and I'm continuously unlearning from how I was raised. And I'm only recently beginning to be able in the past couple of years to set boundaries with people and say, this is not okay. And it's still hard, but it's like, this is uncomfortable. But I've also just kind of had to learn that by saying no or setting boundaries, like disappointment and disappointing people is a natural part of life. And there's no way we're going to get through life without disappointing people. And it is uncomfortable to disappoint people, but we have to be comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling by saying no and setting boundaries. And because I struggle to say no, I am sometimes very unreliable because I overcommit. And that comes up quite a bit for me still. I think I hold myself accountable a lot better than I used to. I find that I blame others a lot less than I used to. I have a hard time holding other people accountable because it just comes back to a communication thing for me. But I do a very good job of respecting the Volt concept of not oversharing information, whether it be about myself or that others have shared with me to people who don't need to hear that thing. Integrity, I have a really hard relationship with. I feel like I choose courage over comfort more than I did, but I definitely still have some work to do there. I still have a lot of work to do with not judging myself for things. And I am more generous with myself now. My positive self-talk has improved, but I definitely can still grow in that too. And that's how I would frame that too. Like, am I generous toward myself? The best way to find out is kind of trying to gauge where your self-talk is. If it is more positive, cool. If you have a lot of negative self-talk, then the generosity bit probably lacks a bit as well. Cool. How do we feel? It's a lot of information, I know. We feel good though? Okay. Does it make sense? Okay. So this one, now we'll get into some of our values. Now that we kind of know a bit about self-trust, and I'll kind of explain why values are important, but I'll also let you guys take a guess if you want to. So, does anyone want to take a guess as to how values are tied into self-care in some way or self-trust? It's okay if not. No one wants to guess. I just want to, if anyone's open to it.
But one thing is that there's always going to be more to do. Is like a phrase that I like, that's you can't do anything on a farm in an hour.
Can't do anything on a farm in an hour.
Like if you're a farmer, you're going to be out all day. There's always going to be something to do.
Yeah, there's always going to be something to do.
And so values and knowing what your values are and knowing what things that need to be on the other side of your boundaries lets you do the most important things, or the most valuable things that have to get done.
Yes, I was. Yes, that is definitely a reason. I want you to say it into the mic though. Could you say it again into the mic? Because I'm going to butcher it. Do you remember?
I can paraphrase what I said, yeah.
Paraphrase what you said, and I'll say it.
Okay. There's.
Go into the mic.
Wait.
Do you want to do it into
Yeah.
the mic?
I can do it into the mic. Yeah, I was just
No, you're good.
wondering if it was maybe you're according the way it did.
Basically what I said as well as I can remember is that there's always more to do. You can't do anything on a farm in an hour. There's always, like, if you want, you can work the entire day doing useful, necessary things. So you have to figure out what you're going to do first and how you're going to protect your time to do the most important stuff. So values are what you want to get done or what's most important to get done. And then boundaries let you protect the time that you need to do that.
Yeah. And with that, if you can get clear on your values, because everyone has different values, this giant long list of values here are things that I think as humans, we all value, but we do value more things over others. And this activity has you narrow it down to 2 values, 2 of the most important things, that if you are living outside of your values, you start to, what's the word I'm looking for? So if my piece, okay, my 2 are love and peace, I guess I'll go ahead and do this. If I start feeling a lot of internal turmoil, then I know that I'm living outside of my values and I need to do some self-care, or I need to communicate, I need to set a boundary, or I need to, any of these things. Does that make sense? Like if you are living outside of your values, then you're going to, that's your first indicator that something isn't right. And so if you can recognize that within yourself, it makes it easier to know what you need, and to narrow down how to go about fixing an issue. Does that make sense? Are you tracking? Okay. And this is a really in-depth exercise, obviously. I just want you guys to take a few minutes to look over it and kind of just start getting the wheels turning a bit. And we can kind of talk about it if you want to. So as you guys are thinking about it, I can kind of walk through it a little bit to kind of demonstrate a bit of like my own answers on here, if that's helpful for you guys. So going along with like my peace value, what are 1 or 2 behaviors that support this value? When I feel at peace, that is like, I don't know why I don't, like you guys know, like if you don't feel at peace, it's like very, it's just not great. I am really content when things are going well. So I'm very light and easygoing, content. That's like a good indicator that I'm living into that value. And then what are 2 slippery behaviors that kind of show that you're living outside of your values? If I'm irritable and I'm feeling resentment, then I have a harder time getting to that inner peace. And those are my first 2 indicators that I know about myself to know that there's a problem and that I'm avoiding a problem. So an example of a time when you were fully living into this value. Probably the first thing that comes to mind was probably right after I got married, actually, because everything was all out on the table with family, and our relationship became very open and public after that. And as hard as that was for my family, I felt like I had found my peace, because it was like, this is who I am, this is how this is going. I'm married now, and so I want whether you like it or not. Sorry if you have a problem with it, but also not sorry, you know. And I felt really at peace for a long time with knowing that this is what I had fought for so long, and what I wanted, and it wasn't about anybody else. And I felt a lot of peace with that, and the amount of support from everybody who came and showed up to say that, you know, we're important, when so much of my life I felt very unimportant and not had a lot of peace within that realm. Thank you. Love you too. I felt a lot of peace during that time, which is not what I expected, actually. So who is someone who knows your values and supports your efforts to live into them? Zoe does a really good job of that. And what does support from this person look like? Whenever I'm really irritable or like really resentful, but I'll use irritability because she supports my whenever I need solo time quite often because I'm very much so very introverted. I am a people person, but I'm also really not a people person. I don't do well in large groups, and I do well in smaller groups. And so if I'm ever overstimulated and need some solo time, then she's the first person to be like, go do what you need to do. Please. You're so angry and you're so irritable. Please just go and heal myself. Or it's also a good indicator that I need sleep. And she'll be like, you need to take a nap. Go take a nap. There will be always things in the house to clean, but go take a nap, because obviously that's something that you need to do to take care of yourself. And what can you do as an act of self-compassion to support yourself in the hard work of living into your values? That it's okay to make mistakes. I won't ever get it completely right. And, you know, I just need to do what's best for me, and sometimes that's uncomfortable, and that's okay. What are the early warning indicators or signs that you're living outside of your values? When I am very irritable and resentful, because I have not established a boundary and don't know how to communicate it because I feel responsible for people's feelings. That is usually an indicator. Yes, I know. What does it feel like when you're living into your values? I have peace again because I've said my piece, whether or not people hear it and respect it. But I've done my part to try to make things work. How can you check yourself? Really just kind of checking in to see kind of my own needs. Am I self-caring? Am I living into my values? How do I feel? Am I able to sleep? Am I able to eat? Am I full of anxiety? All of those things are how I check in with myself for living into values. Does that kind of make sense to you guys? Like why that would be important? Because you've also learned how to self-care through things that you value. Yes, maybe get the wheels turning a little bit. You need to think about it a little more. That's cool. Okay, we'll do one more self-care assessment, and then we're going to get into little groups and kind of brainstorm a bit if everyone's cool with that. This one we don't really need to share a whole lot about. This is just for you to refer to. And whenever you guys are done, just like let me know. But don't beat yourself up about it, please. That's not the point. From this self-care assessment, I have found that I probably don't exercise enough. And I would think it'd feel better if I did exercise. I know. And that I probably have a lot of work to do within my professional self-care, which is a whole different thing. But I do pretty good at spiritual self-care and psychological. But let this be a tool to kind of see where your strengths are so you can play into those more. And then if there's an area that you can make some improvement, be like, well, maybe I can focus on a couple of things in here over time and maybe establish a better habit, if that makes sense. People. Groups of 4. And that includes every person in this room, and then Zoom people. Which, can we set that up on Zoom for people who have like a breakout room?
I think they're already muted, so they can kind of.
Oh, perfect. Already muted, so they can talk.
They're muted. Okay, yeah, they're muted.
Okay, perfect. Feel free to talk, guys, on Zoom about this next thing. I've sent this on the email, if we can share screen to them so they can also see this.
Yeah, I
next
sent
one.
them the links in the chat for them to.
Mhm. So for this, since we don't have a whole lot of time left, if we can just find 2 things for each section, and if you find more, you can do it rather quickly, that's fine, but if you all can just find 2 things that on each category. And I want to do it in groups so you guys can also just like get other ideas from other people and know what fuels other people. And we can just go from there. Well, I know that was a lot, but I want you guys to take this home and like refer to it and grow on it. That's really kind of the purpose for this, was to give you resources and tools to refer to, since last week was just a boatload of information. But I really hope you got something out of this and you got to learn a bit more about yourself and your needs, and understanding how intertwined everything kind of is and why it's important for you to take care of yourself, because taking care of everyone else before yourself, you can't pour from an empty cup. But yeah, so now we'll do some communion.
So I'm just going to pray over it, go get some communion, and you can take it as you go, and then we'll have a couple announcements. So, God, today, help us to carry the concept of self-care as we go, as we connect with you in a sacred act, and help us to live out the values of self-care so that we can grow closer to each other, form healthier connections, including a healthier connection with you, as most of us have baggage in that department. In your name, amen. You take communion, then we'll come back with some quick announcements. These people are coming back and taking communion in the way of announcements. I believe, if I don't have the date wrong, there is a single that will be dropping on Friday.
Sure is.
Sung by our lovely Danny. So, when that drops, definitely make sure that you check it out, give it a listen. It will be on all streaming platforms that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Sure. Also along the lines of music, Asbury Worship Collective, like a week ago, dropped our first single that will be a part of the upcoming album that's being released, that is Queer, Safe, and Affirming.
Nice. So Asbury Worship Collective did a Queer, Safe, Affirming album. My mind's a little blown by that, and I haven't processed through that. But
Because of us.
That makes sense. Yeah. So I had not processed that yet.
It's not explicitly talking about queer people. It's just
Right.
safe.
Created by queer.
Yeah,
It's created by queers.
Created by queer people, has queer undertones and themes, and it's like closeted enough to like, if you listen to it, it will like other people won't assume.
There's
but
one
it's safe.
exception to it that was just written by one straight white cis guy.
It's not a bad song. It's not my favorite song.
I don't
enjoy it.
So if that is something that be careful. If it's something that you enjoy, definitely check it out. The first single is out, so that's great. So lots of great things in the music front as far as what is happening at Woven. John will be back tomorrow, so everyone knows he'll be returning from his cruise. And on Tuesday, we will be meeting with Beaumont's session team, which is basically their board, and we will be discussing and voting upon the merger with Beaumont Presbyterian Church. So they'll be voting on what we've discussed. So there was a group of us that met and consulted with most of you on what that would look like, how would you feel about it, and so they will be voting on that on Tuesday. There's a couple of logistical steps, so just want there to be full transparency as those announcements will be forthcoming, probably within the next week, but that is where that process is at, so it's an exciting time, and I just wanted all of you to know where it was. And then more details will be to come as we know next steps and what's going on. So, any thoughts, questions, emotional outbursts on that? Cool. That is really all we have in the way of announcement. Oh, Charlie has an announcement. Great. Oh, did you get murdered? All the murders in the building. Gosh.
So Dolores and I will be at Woodland Park Festival next Saturday and Sunday. It's 10 to 6 on Saturday, 10 to 5 on Sunday. I know most of you are tied up on Sunday afternoons, but please come out and check out Dolores' quilt work. She just has a lot of amazing work, and love to see you. And also kind of tying in with the message today, while I was driving up here, I was listening to a show called Hidden Brain on NPR, and they were talking about how to avoid getting stuck, what to do when you're getting stuck, and it was really good. So I encourage you to take a listen to that.
Awesome. All right. Anyone else? Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming today, and have a great
Don't
rest of
forget next week, the 2 churches.
Right. Thank you, Alpha. So we will actually still have a service for Woven next week, but there is a joint service at 11 for Beaumont, and at 3:30, actually, John will be interviewing a lot of Beaumont people to help us get to know them better. So, but we will have a 3:30 service, but it will meet in Pride Hall right next to this room.
But the cookout and the potluck and everything.
Right, yes, after the joint service, there will be free food. That will be available. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.